Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I'm Afa Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is uniquely special in that I happen to have a little bit of a personal relationship with her, but I am so pleased to share that my guest is Afa Dworkin, the president and artistic director of the Sphinx Organization. Afa, welcome to Arts Engines.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, obviously there's a host of work that you do related to diversity in the arts. And so I did feel like that is an important topic to be kind of touching on, but also kind of really want to hone in on your approach to that. And so I thought I'd start out with kind of this key question that, diversity seems over the past year to have gotten to be really hip and really cool to talk about in a lot of ways that it wasn't previous to this past year's events. And what I'm wondering is, have you seen that, and has that kind of helped the work that you're doing at Sphinx? Or have you found that things haven't really changed? Just wondering if you found a shift in actual change that is taking place in the field, or do you find that it's more talk about change?
A great question, of course. Amongst many things, I think what we've observed and what I've seen personally is the volume on the dialogue and conversation on diversity is certainly greater. I see that as a positive sign. We do want to amplify the conversation about it. I have also seen some wonderful examples manifesting themselves through programming choices that I've seen some presenting houses make. Even orchestras, I've seen some choices of featuring works by Black and Brown composers and really being a little more thoughtful about how we're representing what is on stage. And of course, stage in this case being more like a Brady Bunch square on our screens. But I do think we've got a long way to go. I think now is a perfect opportunity for us to take those initial thoughts and aspirations and that volume of conversation and turn it into an actionable thing, not for 1 year, not for one season, not for one Zoom talk, not for one conference, but for a sustained period of time. I think history will tell whether the catalyzing events of this spring and summer really had a cataclysmic effect on our field, or whether it was a periodic and an episodic influence, really. I think to truly assess how effective these conversations are, it'll take a few years. I look forward to seeing what's going to happen, but I do want to call upon all of my colleagues around the field and all of our artists to not lose hope and to certainly not lose steam, because we've got a long way to go to show anything that's measurable.
So, kind of in this, if there's institutions out there and a lot of our partners, a lot of our audience, either are leaders or represent, institutions that are trying to deal with this issue. And let's just take a hypothetical institution out there led by people of good intention and goodwill, and they're looking at this issue and they're saying, okay, clearly we've got some diversity issues, whether it's our staffing or our artistic representation, the works we're performing. So, let's really think about this. Let's put together a working group or a committee and think about it, do all of that. If you were talking to them, if you were in the room, what would you say? And what would you say they could or should be doing?
Another great question, and my main request and piece of advice would be, do not chase the consensus. For the vast majority of my career, which has been a better part of the last quarter century, working in this sphere of inclusion and diversity, folks have been stepping carefully and assembling many committees and think tanks and cross-sectional groups, and all sorts of subsets of people who should be driving this progress forward. We haven't made the difference in a fashion that is demonstrable, demonstrative, and lasting. We are now asking for different results. We ought to be ready and prepared to then try different methodology. Otherwise, if we do things the way we've always done them, which is assemble these cabinets and committees and think tanks, we are likely to end up in a spot where we find ourselves currently. And I think that's not really permissible anymore. So my one piece of advice would be, don't worry so much about treading carefully and being seen as perhaps someone who is not a consensus builder, somebody who is not a peacemaker. I think in situations like this, when we need to fundamentally turn the sector upside down and prioritize inclusion and participation, it should be expected that we're going to feel rather uncomfortable. So dig into that discomfort and go for it, but set goals which are both realistic, but certainly ones you can measure and ones you can then further stretch and keep growing each semester, if it's an academic institution, each concert season, for each new program that you're building. I think it's really important that we challenge ourselves and really hold ourselves deeply and honestly accountable toward this change that we're after. I think absent that, all of this would have been for naught, and we cannot allow that. I'm thinking of this quote that I just recently was really sinking my teeth into, and it's John Lewis's. He said, "We may have not chosen this time, but the time has chosen us." So this is our time. In other words, there isn't going to be another. This time is really, really different. It's an opportunity to lead, to lean into that discomfort, to say that, you know, our programming currently is woefully not representative of the communities in which we reside. What would be, for example, a step toward really fixing that? Might it start at 10%? Might it go to 20% the following season? And then set that. And really, it falls upon all of us leaders who have the opportunity and the duty to fight for more than just ourselves, to use our privilege and say we're going to hold ourselves personally and ourselves collectively accountable for this work. And that's how we make a difference.
So thank you so much for sharing that. And so I think about, white leaders in our field, many of whom may be watching this show right now, and thinking of that, you know, they're looking at a situation that might relate to racial equity, diversity, and it's rife with controversy. And they see social media exploding and all of that, right? And they've got an option to basically not act, to kind of just stay back a little bit. Let's just see what happens here, because they're unsure. They want to be part of fixing the solution, but they're looking at going, I'm not sure, and they see a colleague who may have done something with good intention and then get blasted for it on social media, right? So they're looking at that and then maybe pragmatically going, you know what, we tend to switch jobs every 3 to 5 years. If I make a decision and it's not well received, that could really, you know, torpedo my career opportunities. Maybe best for me to just hold back here, right? When you have, so what you had just shared, I thought was so powerful for institutions. Now I'm wondering if you're just sitting, right, you know, sitting in a restaurant with an individual leader who's facing those real challenges with real serious intentions. What do you tell them as it relates to those valid fears for them?
I say, I think institutions are people. And as such, institutions are led by individuals who are charged with really shaping the vision and motivating their teams and those collectives and communities which have empowered them to lead. So I think the danger here for us in treading carefully and fearing a potentially less than ideal result from some of the actions we may take is really lies in kind of needing to put into our arsenal as leaders a bit of courage, or a lot bit of courage, but also the wisdom to invite people other people who do not think like us to help steer the ship with you. In other words, since we're specifically thinking about the power and the privilege of allies, non-BIPOC leaders at the head of these, at the realm of these cultural institutions or educational institutions, then the time has come to recognize that you have a wealth of resources at your disposal. So as you shape a decision, it's very important that this decision not be made by solely the person leading an institution, particularly if they are not of color, but also if we have heretofore relied upon the counsel of certain people who are sort of the usual suspects in our arsenal of mentors, it's really important we ask ourselves, what am I missing? And if I'm going to go after a result I have not been fortunate to have, what do I need to add into this mix as I try to weed through and really make a decision about how to do something that's going to have a lasting effect? Then I think it's really important to invite experts and leaders in the community, particularly the community in which we reside or that which we hope to serve, to really listen to those voices and allow them to infuse wisdom into what we're doing. And I'm not in any way suggesting carte blanche, make it really a listening game where you hear something and then act upon it, but absolutely centralize those voices and intentionally include them, because we have been robbing ourselves of the opportunity to really develop these competencies and really intelligencies, which are not possible to develop without the right voices in it. So it's a perfect chance now, an opportunity we've been afforded to really make intelligent decisions, some of which may go against the grain and perhaps not make everyone equally happy, but these decisions will have a lasting effect long after we leave an institution. So I think relative to personal integrity, we have to really think about what we can do now and who needs to be heard now, and how do I use my privilege to make sure those right voices are heard and the decisions that we make account for those who have been either intentionally or unintentionally silenced.
Gotcha. So, I mean, it's extraordinary. And of course, I know you're incorporating so much of what you're sharing in the leadership that you bring to so many aspects, Sphinx, and to the field itself. I wanted to kind of just switch to that for just a quick second. I know we're running short on time, but in terms of your own leadership, right? You lead a team that is extraordinarily resilient, and there's a low turnover rate, and seems like very high morale and energy and productivity and efficiency and all of that. Could you just share, like, are there, two or three kind of key leadership principles that you bring to bear that has enabled this success in terms of your, administrative and artistic leadership of Sphinx?
Perhaps a couple. I think one, I should just preface it by saying I'm fortunate to have assembled and now enjoy the camaraderie of a team that's just extremely talented and empowered. And I think recognition and celebration of that is probably the key to the success of the organization and really the community we've been able to build. I think one of the things I've always leaned into is a sense of empowerment and development of trust amongst the people with whom I lead. And I say this intentionally, in that in building an enterprise like Sphinx and then having the privilege to steer the ship now, after almost quarter of a century of successful track record in this programming, I think the most important thing has been developing a sense of trust amongst the leaders who work with me. In that, and what I mean by trust is once you empower a person and give them a portfolio to lead, there will be times when their thinking and their vision and their urge to do something may depart from mine. But having developed the trust within one another that's really reciprocal, I often will defer and give up the spotlight or really empower the person to make a decision that they feel is right, so long as it's consistent with the vision of Sphinx. It may be different than what I believe in that particular moment, but I think it's really important that once you empower someone, you really do let them lead from beginning to end. Then if something does not really turn out in an optimal fashion, we can, in a collaborative way, dissect it and look at what we could have done differently, but together. So I think that building of trust is probably most essential. And the other piece that is directly related to this is the building of accountability. I think as much flexibility and as much freedom for someone to be creative and lead in a fashion that they see fit, I think that needs to be not contrasted, but supported by a sense of accountability and that clarity of a vision. So once we agree upon something, whether it's authored by me or authored by a person leading that portfolio, we agree upon something, and that something is defined by time, by results, and ultimate vision that is singular and united. So when we look at something, we can honestly and as objectively as possible look at it and say, did we succeed? Was this impactful? And I think leading in that way does not permit for too many departures in interpreting something, since we agree. So I think that collaboration, building of trust is ultimately, these have been essential. And I think they've permitted Sphinx to really continue to insist upon that combination of mission-driven inclusivity, integration, participation, diversity, with that sense of commitment to excellence, because we really can't afford to depart from that.
Wow. So it's totally amazing. And unfortunately, we're out of time. But one last question. Obviously, this work that you do, there are challenges that arise, frustrations, things like that, sometimes things that might seem insurmountable. What do you do to pull inspiration? Where do you find inspiration in the toughest of times as a leader? Where are you able to derive that inspiration or strength to tackle any of those challenges you might encounter on any given day?
Oh, mine's a dual answer. I'll cheat a bit. I think my strength and foundation, and something that strengthens my spirit at all times, is really my family, as you know. I think that sense of acceptance, support that is unconditional, and frankly, love, I think it strengthens a person, and it allows, I think it just equips and empowers me to do good. In any circumstance, or at least to do the very best that I can. But also, I am constantly inspired by the activism and the resiliency and creativity of our artists. I think all I have to do when things get tough, or when something doesn't go in the way that I really think it should, all I have to do is open up my inbox and be exposed to incredible music, and frankly, ingenuity that comes from our artists, some of the youngest ones. It's just been a privilege to see our artists innovate and persevere. And frankly, I think many of my colleagues in much larger institutions can take example and inspiration from these artists, because if they can innovate and persevere amidst a global pandemic, when all we can do is appear in Zoom boxes for one another, then imagine how empowered and reinforced and refreshed and determined they're going to return once we're back on stage. I think that inspires me. It challenges me to do better, and I hope it does the same for the world.
Afa Dworkin, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for joining me here on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.